I've lived in the suburbs of Oakdale for 5 years, renting a small house from my husband's family. It's a modest place with a white picket fence and a 20-year-old Toyota Corolla parked in the driveway. My husband, Ryan, works as an accountant downtown, and I'm a part-time librarian at the local library. We've been married for 3 years and have a comfortable routine. Every Friday morning, I stop by the Starbucks on Main Street for a coffee before my shift, and I always see Mrs. Jenkins from next door sipping on a latte. She's a sweet woman who has lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. Last week, I received a letter in the mail from an old pen pal named Emily, whom I hadn't spoken to since high school. We had exchanged letters sporadically over the years, but I assumed we had lost touch. As I read through the letter, I noticed something peculiar. Emily's writing style was identical to my husband's. I tried to brush it off as a coincidence, but a nagging feeling lingered. I should have kept reading more carefully. As I continued reading Emily's letter, I noticed that she mentioned my husband's favorite coffee shop, Brew Teufel Day, which we always go to on Saturday mornings. She said it was her favorite too, and that she often sat at the same table by the window. I remembered a conversation with Ryan last week, where he mentioned seeing someone new sitting at that table, but I brushed it off as just a coincidence. Now, Emily's mention of it seemed deliberate. I turned the page expecting more small talk, but instead found a passage that made my heart skip a beat. By the way, have you and Ryan tried the new flavor of the month at Brew Teufel Day? It's a real game changer. The phrase game changer was Ryan's exact word from last week's conversation. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the words, and my mind started racing with possibilities. But it was the sentence that followed that really caught my attention. I'm planning to visit Oakdale next month, and I was thinking of staying with Ryan. My eyes widened as I stared at the sentence, my heart pounding in my chest. Why would Emily say that? And why did she know about our routine at Brew Teufel Day? I started keeping a list of every time Ryan mentioned Emily in passing conversation. At first, it was just a casual mention of her name in a group setting, but then he started bringing up specific details about their shared interests. He would talk about how much he loved the same book series she liked, and how they had even discussed starting a book club together. I tried to brush it off as mere coincidence, but the more he spoke about Emily, the more I felt like I was missing something. I decided to pay closer attention to our conversations and see if I could uncover any more information. On Tuesday, Ryan mentioned that he had met Emily for coffee at Brew Teufel Day last weekend. He said she was visiting from out of town and had wanted to catch up with him. I made a note in my list. Ryan met Emily for coffee on Saturday. When I arrived home from work the next day, I found a small package on our front porch with no return address. Inside was a framed photo of a woman who looked identical to me. She was wearing the same necklace I had bought on our honeymoon. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the photo. Who was this woman? As I continued to investigate, I started noticing small discrepancies in Ryan's story. He would mention Emily's name and then quickly change the subject, but not before mentioning something that didn't quite add up. For example, he said she loved hiking, but when I looked up her favorite trails, they all seemed to be located on the opposite side of town from where we live. I started to wonder if Ryan was even telling me the truth about his relationship with Emily. I began to snoop through our home, looking for any clues that might explain what was going on. In our living room, I found a small notebook belonging to Ryan, filled with notes about Emily's favorite books and movies. I also discovered a hidden folder on his laptop labeled E. When I opened it, I found a series of emails between Ryan and Emily, discussing everything from their shared interests to their personal lives. I stared at the photo of Emily, identical to me in every feature. The necklace she wore was the same one I had bought on our honeymoon. And then I saw the tattoo on her left ankle, a matching one that Ryan and I got together during our first anniversary trip. As I stared at the photo of Emily, identical to me in every feature, a cold dread crept over me. The necklace she wore was the same one I had bought on our honeymoon, and it sparked a memory that had been buried deep within me. I remembered Ryan mentioning that his twin sister, who he barely kept in touch with, had a passion for writing and photography. But there was something more, a detail that had nagged at me since reading Emily's letter. The phrase game changer that she mentioned, the one about the new flavor of the month at Brew Teufel Day, it was the exact same phrase Ryan used when he told me about the coffee shops. A wave of realization washed over me as I looked at the photo, the identical tattoo on Emily's ankle, the same one that Ryan and I got together during our first anniversary trip. It wasn't just a coincidence. Emily was my husband's twin sister, and she had been manipulating me all along. The emails between Ryan and Emily, the ones I had discovered hidden on his laptop, they were all part of her plan to gather intel on our family. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me as I realized that Ryan had been keeping this secret from me for years. The truth was that Ryan didn't have a pen pal or a friend in Emily. He had a twin sister who had been using our friendship to get close to us. And now, I was left with more questions than answers. What else had Ryan lied about, and how deep did this deception go? I filed a police report, and after a thorough investigation, The authorities discovered that Ryan's twin sister had been using our friendship to gather intel on our family. She was charged with stalking and harassment and was ordered to stay away from us. I also served Ryan with divorce papers, citing infidelity and emotional distress. As I looked through the letters and emails she had sent me, I realized that Emily's manipulation had been a desperate attempt to get close to her sister. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure. I knew that I had to move on from this painful chapter in my life. As I began to rebuild, I started a new hobby: photography. One day, while reviewing my photos, I stumbled upon a picture of Emily's favorite trail. It was the same trail where Ryan and I had our first date. I smiled, feeling a sense of hope for the future. It was time to close this chapter and start anew. 2 weeks later, I wanted to follow up on my previous post and provide an update on the situation with Ryan's twin sister, Emily. As I mentioned, she was charged with stalking and harassment, and the court date is set for next month. My lawyer just confirmed that they're pushing for a guilty plea, which would ensure Emily gets the help she needs. I'm still trying to process the complexity of it all, how someone could use our friendship like that, but I'm grateful for the support of my loved ones and friends. My husband's been amazing, by the way, and we've started talking about starting a family soon, which is both exciting and terrifying. As I reflect on everything that happened, I'm reminded of how fragile trust can be and how quickly it can be broken. But I'm also grateful for the lessons learned and the chance to rebuild. I've been engaged to Alex for 2 years, and we're getting married in a week. My fiancé's identical twin brother, Jake, stood in the back of our church wedding, nodding approval as I exchanged vows with Alex. We've never met before, but he showed up uninvited and seemed perfectly at ease. I tried to brush it off as a weird family thing, but it's been bothering me ever since. My mom is thrilled that we're getting married, and she's been making me try on wedding dresses every weekend. She's been saying something is missing, and I should see what I can do about making my fiancé happy, whatever that means. I drive a 2018 Honda Civic EXL, which has a busted CD player that I keep meaning to fix. I've been putting off going to the Honda dealership on 33rd Street to get it repaired because I hate dealing with paperwork. As I was getting ready for bed last night, I caught Jake staring at me from across the room again. I was getting ready for work on Wednesday morning when I saw a small, sleek smartwatch box on my kitchen counter with my name on it. I had no memory of ordering anything like that online, and certainly not from this brand, Fossil. I turned the box over in my hand, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I saw my name printed on the label. I must have gotten it as a gift, but whose? My mom had given me a new phone case from Best Buy last week, but I couldn't remember if she'd said anything about the watch. I pulled out my phone to check the Fossil website and see if there was any record of my purchase. As I scrolled through my order history, I noticed that my mom's name was listed as the default shipping address for all my online orders. That was weird. I had always used my own address for shipping. I made a mental note to ask her about it at dinner tonight. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a series of strange occurrences that would shake me to my core. I've been trying to shake off the feeling of unease since Jake showed up at our wedding, but it's been lingering in the back of my mind. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences, hoping to find some pattern or explanation. Last night, I went to the Fossil website and noticed that my mom's name was listed as the default shipping address for all my online orders. I asked her about it at dinner, but she seemed flustered and changed the subject. She's been acting weird lately, always glancing over her shoulder when we're out in public. I decided to investigate further and started going through our household bills and receipts, looking for any inconsistencies. That's when I noticed that our electricity bill had been paid in full 3 months early, with a check from an account I'd never heard of. The name on the check was J. Smith, just a generic name, but it looked familiar. I couldn't place it, so I started digging deeper into our bank statements and credit card history. That's when I found it, a series of small transactions to a company called Smith's Landscaping, with an address in the suburbs that matched my mom's old workplace. It was a tiny payment, just $20, but it had been made on the same day Jake showed up at our wedding. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that Jake might be more involved in our lives than I initially thought. I decided to look into Smith's Landscaping further and started searching online for any information about the company. What I found was disturbing. A news article from 10 years ago about a family who had been swindled out of their life savings by a con artist posing as a landscaper. The article mentioned a J. Smith as the mastermind behind the scheme, and the description of the scam matched the small transactions on our bank statement. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like my mom might be involved in a Ponzi scheme, and Jake might be the mastermind. I felt like I was walking on thin ice, but I knew I had to keep investigating to get to the truth. I started making phone calls to the Better Business Bureau and the local police department, hoping to gather more information about Smith's Landscaping and its connection to our household. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was getting close to uncovering a dark secret. one that could change everything I thought I knew about my fiancé, his brother, and our entire family. I stood in front of the mirror staring at my face. It was identical to the face in the fossil watch box on my counter. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I'd been wearing a wedding ring identical to the one my fiancé Alex wore on our wedding day. But it wasn't his ring. I stared at the fossil watch box on my counter, and my eyes widened as I saw the small inscription on the inside of the lead. Property of Emily Smith. It was the same name on the check that had paid our electricity bill 3 months early. My mom's old workplace, where she had worked for over a decade, was listed as Smith's Landscaping. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that my fiancé Alex was not who he seemed to be. He was not just Jake's identical twin brother, but also his accomplice in a decades-long Ponzi scheme. My mom had been a key player all along, using her old workplace as a front for the scam. The transactions on our bank statement made sense now. They were not just random payments, but a way to launder money and create a paper trail. I remembered the strange behavior of my fiancé's brother Jake at our wedding, and how my mom had acted furtively when I asked her about the default shipping address on my online orders. It was all connected: the watch, the electricity bill, the fake fossil account in my name. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that I had unknowingly participated in this scheme, and that my fiancé's ring was not just a coincidence. The identical twin brother, Jake, was not just a random guest at our wedding, he was a mastermind, and Alex was his accomplice. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. I stood in the front of my kitchen, staring at the fossil watch box on the counter, now empty except for a small note that read, "Property of Emily Smith." I felt a mix of emotions as I realized the true extent of my family's involvement in the Ponzi scheme. My fiancé Alex was not who he seemed to be, and neither was his identical twin brother Jake. They were both accomplices in a decades-long scam that had been hiding in plain sight. The transactions on our bank statement, the fake fossil account in my name, it all made sense now. I remembered the strange behavior of my fiancé's brother at our wedding, and how my mom had acted furtively when I asked her about the default shipping address on my online orders. It was all connected. I decided to cooperate with the authorities and provide them with the evidence I had gathered. The police arrived at my house, and after a thorough investigation, they arrested Alex and Jake for their involvement in the Ponzi scheme. I've been living in my 2-bedroom condo in downtown Oakville for 3 years, surrounded by the hum of 24-hour coffee shops and the glow of streetlights on Yonge Street. My ex-husband, Alex, and I had just finalized our divorce last month, and I was still unpacking boxes and trying to get used to the silence. We met through mutual friends at a Tim Hortons in 2012 and got married 3 years later. I recall one specific date, January 15, 2015, when Alex surprised me with a brand new red Honda Civic EXL just in time for our winter road trip to Niagara Falls. My best friend, Rachel, was my maid of honor, and she always teased me about how Alex loved that car almost as much as he loved me. After the divorce, I thought I'd be relieved to see the car go. But lately, I've been getting anxious every time I drive by the dealership where Alex worked, wondering if he's still there, wondering what he's doing now. My lawyer, Mike, seemed nice enough when we met for our first consultation last week, but something about him made me feel uneasy, like he was probing for more information than he needed to. He mentioned he'd been in the business for over a decade, and his brother was married to Alex's twin brother, who had passed away 5 years ago. I remember the way Mike's eyes flickered when he said brother, and I should have kept asking questions then, but I let the conversation slide. Now, I'm starting to wonder if Mike's really on my side. I was rummaging through my closet, sorting out old photos and clothes for donation, when I stumbled upon the 2015 wedding album Alex had given me. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed that all the receipts for the wedding decorations were from a company called Bella Vita Events, which was owned by my best friend Rachel's sister-in-law, Sophia. I remembered Alex mentioning that Sophia had worked with him on the wedding planning, and how he had gotten a discount on the flowers because of their connection. But what caught my attention was the handwritten note on the receipt for the wedding cake. "Thanks, Mike, for hooking us up with the deal." It was signed with a scribbled M at the bottom. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that Mike, my lawyer, must have known Alex well enough to get him a discount on the wedding cake. I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but my mind started racing with questions. What else had Mike known about our marriage? And what was his true interest in representing me now that we were divorced? As I continued to flip through the wedding album, I noticed that the pages were slightly dog-eared, as if someone had frequently referenced them. I remembered Alex's fondness for dog earrings, and it made me wonder if he had been using this album as some kind of reference material after our divorce. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease as I realized how much of my marriage was intertwined with Mike's brother's connections. I decided to investigate further and started digging into Alex's phone records, looking for any suspicious calls or messages. I spent the next few days poring over the bills, searching for any inconsistencies. One evening, while reviewing the records, I stumbled upon a series of encrypted calls made by Alex to a number registered under the name Bella Vita Events. The frequency and timing of these calls suggested that Alex was in close contact with someone from the event planning company, possibly even Mike's brother. I decided to pay a visit to Bella Vita Events and see if I could gather more information. As I walked into the office, I noticed a familiar name on the door: Sophia, Rachel's sister-in-law. I asked to speak to her, and after a brief wait, she emerged from the back office, looking nervous. We chatted for a few minutes, and I asked her about her role in Alex's wedding planning. She seemed evasive, and I sensed that she was hiding something. I thanked her for her time and left, feeling more convinced than ever that Mike's involvement in my divorce was not as coincidental as it seemed. I started keeping a notebook to record all the discrepancies and inconsistencies I discovered. The pages began to fill up with notes about Mike's connections to Alex, Sophia's involvement in the wedding planning, and the suspicious phone calls. I felt like I was getting closer to the truth, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. As I continued to investigate, I started to notice strange occurrences around my condo. Doors would be open when I was sure I had closed them, and I would catch glimpses of someone lurking in the shadows. I stared at the security footage on my phone, my heart racing as I rewound the tape for what felt like the 100th time. Mike's expression was calm and professional, but his eyes flickered towards the door every few seconds, as if he expected someone to walk in. And then I saw a small, almost imperceptible nod, directed at someone just out of frame. As I watched the security footage again, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: Mike's eyes flickering towards the door every few seconds, as if he expected someone to walk in. And then I saw a small, almost imperceptible nod, directed at someone just out of frame. I rewound the tape and slowed it down, my heart racing with anticipation. When I replayed the nod, I noticed that Mike's eyes met the eyes of a person I couldn't quite make out, but I could see the faint outline of a wedding band on their hand. I rewound the tape again, this time pausing on the figure's face. As the image came into focus, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was Sophia, Rachel's sister-in-law and the owner of Bella Vita Events. I remembered how she had seemed evasive when I asked her about her role in Alex's wedding planning. I realized now that she wasn't just evasive, she was hiding something. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Mike's brother's connections to Alex weren't a coincidence. They were part of a larger scheme, one that involved Sophia and Bella Vita Events. I remembered the handwritten note on the wedding cake receipt, signed with a scribbled M at the bottom. It was no coincidence, it was a nod to Mike himself, who had been secretly working with Sophia to orchestrate Alex's marriage from behind the scenes. The investigation had been a sham all along, and I had been played. I sat in my condo, surrounded by the silence that had grown so familiar over the past few months. My ex-husband Alex was nowhere to be found, and I had finally pieced together the truth about his marriage and my own divorce proceedings. Mike, my lawyer, had been in cahoots with Sophia, Rachel's sister-in-law, to orchestrate our entire relationship from behind the scenes. The realization was both shocking and liberating, as if a weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. I remembered the look on Sophia's face when I confronted her about her role in Alex's wedding planning. It was a mixture of guilt and fear that still haunted me. But as I reflected on the entire ordeal, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had uncovered the truth, and I had emerged stronger and wiser because of it. I decided to take my findings to the authorities, and Mike and Sophia were eventually charged with conspiracy to commit marriage fraud and breach of contract. I live in the small town of Willow Creek, where everyone knows each other's names and faces. My husband Alex and I moved here 5 years ago, seeking a quieter life after the city. We have a small farm on the outskirts of town, where Alex raises a few cows and grows his own vegetables. On Sundays, we like to drive into town to pick up groceries at the local Walmart supercenter. One Sunday morning in April, as we were unloading our bags from the store, I noticed a familiar face in the background of my mother's old photograph album. She had taken the picture on a trip to visit us in 2010. The person in the photo looked out of place among our family and friends, a scruffy-looking individual with a messy beard, dressed in tattered clothes. I couldn't quite remember where I had seen him before, but it sparked my curiosity. My mother has always been tight-lipped about her past, and I've often wondered what secrets she might be keeping from us. As I flipped through the album, I noticed that this person appeared in several other photos, always lurking in the background. It was as if he had been trying to keep a low profile, but my mother's camera caught him anyway. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this stranger might be connected to our family's history in ways we never suspected. As I continued to browse through the old photograph album, I noticed that the suspicious-looking individual seemed to be always lurking in the background of the photos. One particular picture caught my attention, a Polaroid snapshot taken at the local diner, Mom's Diner, on a sunny afternoon in August 2008. He was standing next to my mother, but his face was partially hidden behind a newspaper. I remembered that Alex and I had gone to Mom's Diner just last week for their famous Friday night prime rib special, and I had struck up a conversation with the owner, Jerry, about the old photographs on the walls. He told me that they had been taken by a local photographer, but now I wondered if there was more to it. The more I looked at the Polaroid, the more I felt a sense of unease. It was as if this stranger had been trying to blend in with our family's happy memories, but his presence seemed to be casting a shadow over everything. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about this photo, and I decided to show it to Alex when he got home from work. I started going through my mother's photograph albums again, this time paying closer attention to the people in the background. I noticed that the suspicious-looking individual was always lurking around, often with his back turned or face obscured. In one photo, he was standing next to a vintage Ford F-150, which we still had on our farm, but it looked like it hadn't been washed in years. I remembered that Alex had mentioned we needed to get the old truck serviced, and I wondered if this person might have been using it. I started making a list of every photo I found with him in it, trying to pinpoint where he was and when. I also began looking for any other signs or clues that might link him to our family. As I continued to dig through the albums, I noticed that the suspicious individual seemed to be getting more and more agitated in the photos. In one picture, he was shown gesturing angrily at someone off camera, while in another, he appeared to be trying to sneak away unnoticed. I started to feel like I was piecing together a puzzle. But I still couldn't quite put my finger on what was bothering me. The more I looked at the photos, the more I felt like there was something I was missing. I decided to take a closer look at our family's history and see if I could find any records of this person being involved with us. I spent hours poring over old tax returns, insurance policies, and other documents, but I couldn't find any mention of him. I started to feel frustrated, like I was getting nowhere. I also began to notice that our family's old farmhouse seemed to be in disrepair. The roof was leaky, the windows were drafty, and the once fertile soil was now dry and cracked. I remembered that Alex had mentioned we needed to do some major repairs, but we'd been putting it off. Now I wondered if this person might have been involved in the deterioration of our property. One photo in particular caught my eye, a picture of my mother and the suspicious individual standing together in front of our old farmhouse. They were both smiling, but he looked off. As I flipped through the old photograph album, I noticed that my mother's brother, who had passed away years ago, was listed as Uncle Jack in every caption. But on one particular photo, his name was scribbled out and replaced with Richard. As I continued to examine the old photograph album, a disturbing realization dawned on me. The suspicious-looking individual in the background of several photos was none other than my own mother's brother, Uncle Richard. I had been messled by her stories about him passing away years ago. But what really shook me was that he wasn't just a distant relative. He was someone we had let live on our family farm during Prohibition, hiding from the law. The vintage Ford F-150 that had been collecting dust in our barn all these years must have been his. I remembered now how Alex and I had talked about fixing it up, but he had always seemed hesitant, almost protective of it. It made sense now. The way he would get agitated when I mentioned the old truck, the way he would try to steer the conversation away from it. I recalled the Polaroid photo taken at Mom's diner, where Uncle Richard was standing next to my mother, but his face was partially hidden behind a newspaper. It was as if he had been trying to keep a low profile. Just like in the old photos. The more I looked at the pictures, the more I saw him, always lurking in the background, yet somehow part of our family's history. But what really got my blood boiling was the fact that Alex and I had unknowingly harbored a fugitive on our property for all these years. As I looked through the old photograph album, I finally pieced together the truth about our family's past. My mother had been harboring her brother, Uncle Richard, on our farm during Prohibition, hiding him from the law. The old Ford F-150 in our barn was his, and Alex's reluctance to fix it up made sense now. But what really shook me was that he had been living on our property for years, using our home as a hideout. I realized that my mother's secrecy about her past was not just about hiding her brother, but also about protecting him from the consequences of his actions. I felt a mix of emotions: anger at being unknowingly harbored a fugitive, sadness at the secrets my family had kept, and a sense of responsibility for not noticing earlier. But as I looked through the old photos, I saw Uncle Richard's presence in our lives as a reminder that our family has a complex history, full of both love and mistakes. I decided to take action, and we contacted the authorities to report the situation. 2 weeks later, I've been inundated with messages and comments, thanking me for shedding light on our family's dark past. It's surreal to think that something as mundane as old photograph albums could spark such a significant turn of events. The authorities have since confirmed Uncle Richard's identity and are working on tracking down the remaining members of his gang who used our farm as a hideout. We've also received a call from the local historical society expressing interest in preserving the farm's history, including the story of my mother's brother. As I look around our property now, I'm reminded that the truth doesn't just set us free, but also requires us to carry the weight of it. I'm sitting in our cozy kitchen, surrounded by the warm glow of candles and the faint scent of fresh flowers. It's my birthday, and my husband, Alex, is trying to make it special. We've been together for 3 years now, and he's been dropping hints about planning a romantic getaway for months. But when I reach into his pocket to find the invitation he's been hiding, my heart skips a beat. The date on the invitation reads 6 months from now, and it's addressed to both of us as the happy couple. I feel a shiver run down my spine as I wonder what's going on. Is this the wedding we've been putting off for so long? I've been stressing about our finances. But maybe Alex has finally figured out a way to make our dream come true. We've been living in a small apartment above his family's old bookstore in downtown Willow Creek, and I know he's been working hard to save up for the down payment on a house. I glance around the kitchen, taking in the familiar sights: the old coffee maker, the stack of dog-eared romance novels on the bookshelf, the framed photo of us from our first anniversary. But something feels off, and I try to shake off the feeling that this is all too good to be true. I glance at the kitchen clock, and it's already 9:45 p.m. Alex is running late with dinner. I pour myself a glass of wine and take a seat at the table, trying to distract myself from the nagging feeling that something's off. As I scroll through my phone, I notice a text from the local florist, Petunias, confirming the delivery of the bouquet Alex had ordered for my birthday. But what catches my eye is the timestamp. It says the order was placed at 8:47 p.m. tonight, which is an hour before I arrived home from work. I frown, wondering why Alex would order flowers for my birthday without mentioning it to me. And then I notice the brand of wine he's opened: our favorite 2015 Pinot Grigio from the local winery, but one we've never drunk together in a dinner setting. The bottle has a faintly familiar label sticker on the back. It looks like the same store where we bought our wedding rings 3 years ago. As I sat at the table, sipping my wine and trying to shake off the feeling of unease, I noticed that the bouquet of flowers from Petunias was not the only thing that seemed out of place. The centerpiece on our dining table, a vase filled with fresh flowers, was not the usual mix of sunflowers and daisies that we loved. Instead, it was a peculiar arrangement of white lilies and baby's breath. I made a mental note to ask Alex about it later. As I scrolled through my phone, I saw that the local florist had left a note on our online order: special occasion, please deliver promptly. I wondered who they meant by special occasion. Was it our anniversary or my birthday? And why did they need to emphasize prompt delivery? I glanced around the kitchen and noticed that our favorite recipe book, which usually sat on the cookbook stand, was nowhere to be found. I remembered that Alex had been planning to cook my favorite dish for dinner, but where was the book? I asked myself if he had simply moved it to a different shelf, or if someone else had taken it. I started keeping a list in my head of all the things that seemed off about the evening. The wine label on the 2015 Pinot Grigio seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. And why did Alex need to seal the envelope for the wedding invitation? I wondered if he was trying to cover something up. As I poured myself another glass of wine, I noticed that the window in the living room was open a crack, even though I could have sworn we had closed it when we came home. And on the kitchen counter, there was a small box of clear envelopes, similar to the ones Alex used for our wedding rings. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I wondered what was going on. I decided to investigate further and started digging through our wedding files. I remembered that Alex had mentioned something about updating our vows, but I couldn't find any evidence of it in our documents. And when I checked our phone records, I noticed a suspicious text from an unknown number: meet me at the Old Oak at midnight. Come alone. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized that something was very wrong. I tried to call Alex, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I started to feel trapped and unsure of what to do next. I opened the safe deposit box at the old bank downtown where Alex and I had stored our wedding rings. Inside, I found a brand new certificate of marriage, dated 6 months from now, with my name crossed out and replaced by a name I didn't recognize. The photo attached showed us standing together on a beach, smiling at the camera, but not the same beach we got married on. I stood frozen in the safe deposit box, staring at the certificate of marriage with my name crossed out and replaced by a name I didn't recognize. The photo attached showed us standing together on a beach, smiling at the camera, but not the same beach we got married on. A wave of unease washed over me as I realized that Alex had been planning to marry someone else all along. The wine label on the 2015 Pinot Grigio, the familiar vase on our dining table, and the open window in the living room all made sense now. They were all part of the elaborate setup for a wedding that was never meant to be with me. I remembered the text from the florist: special occasion, please deliver promptly, and how Alex had been trying to keep everything a secret. He must have used our shared online account to order the flowers and wines, and even staged the dinner setup to make it look like our usual celebration. But why? I felt a pang of sadness as I realized that I had been so blind to his deception. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder as I stood there, trying to process what I had discovered. I thought back to our conversations about updating our vows and how Alex had been evasive when I asked him about it. He must have been planning this new marriage behind my back, using our own wedding files and documents to make it seem real. As I stood there, the air in the safe deposit box seemed to grow thick with the weight of Alex's betrayal. I felt a mix of emotions: shock, sadness, anger, but mostly, I felt a deep sense of loss for the relationship we thought we had built together. I stood in the safe deposit box, staring at the certificate of marriage with my name crossed out and replaced by a name I didn't recognize. The photo attached showed us standing together on a beach, smiling at the camera, but not the same beach we got married on. I felt a pang of sadness as I realized that Alex had been planning to marry someone else all along. I decided to take action and contact a lawyer specializing in family law. Together, we gathered evidence of Alex's deception and filed for divorce. The court granted me sole custody of our property and assets, and the marriage certificate was officially annulled. As I walked out of the safe deposit box, I felt a sense of closure and relief wash over me. I realized that I had been living in a bubble, blinded by love and trust. But now, I saw the truth and I was ready to move on. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation slowly lifting off my shoulders. I moved into my parents' old house in the suburbs of Oakdale last summer, after finishing college. My mom, Karen, still lived there with her husband, Mark, who had a fondness for worn denim and old rock music. They'd been trying to sell the place, but no one seemed interested. My dad was a bit of a neat freak, so the house always looked spotless, even with his chronic back pain making it hard to bend. I paid them rent on my own, which was a big change from when I was a teenager and they covered all my expenses. Mark would often lend me his old Honda Civic, a 20-year-old model with a faded sticker on the bumper that read, "World's OKS Golfer." I used it to drive to my part-time job at the local library, where I worked as an assistant librarian for 2 years before moving back in with my parents. My mom would sometimes drop by the library during her lunch break, just to surprise me and say hi. The director, Mrs. Patel, was always polite but firm about visitors during work hours. I'd always try to cover for her, not wanting to get her in trouble. My phone had been acting up lately, so I'd been borrowing Mark's old flip phone to make calls. I should have kept checking my own phone more often. I started noticing strange discrepancies with my phone records last Thursday evening around 9:15 p.m. I'd received a call from an unknown number. But what caught my attention was that the call had been made from the exact same cell tower where Mark's old flip phone always picked up signal. I recalled that my own phone had been acting up, and I'd been using Mark's flip phone to make calls, so it seemed unlikely that someone else would be using our cell tower at that specific time. The phone company assured me it was probably just a coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. The next day, I went to the library and checked my email on Mrs. Patel's computer, which always had a fresh copy of the Oakdale Gazette on the desk. Under the Oakdale Classifieds section, I saw an ad for a local photographer looking for subjects for a documentary project about childhood development. Something about it didn't sit right with me, especially since the same photographer, James Reed, had been taking pictures of my own childhood years ago. I made a mental note to ask Mark about it at dinner. I started noticing strange discrepancies with my phone records last Thursday evening around 9:15 p.m. I'd received a call from an unknown number. But what caught my attention was that the call had been made from the exact same cell tower where Mark's old flip phone always picked up signal. I recalled that my own phone had been acting up, and I'd been using Mark's flip phone to make calls, so it seemed unlikely that someone else would be using our cell tower at that specific time. The next day, I went to the library and checked my email on Mrs. Petal's computer, which always had a fresh copy of the Oakdale Gazette on the desk. Under the Oakdale Classifieds section, I saw an ad for a local photographer looking for subjects for a documentary project about childhood development. Something about it didn't sit right with me, especially since the same photographer, James Reed, had been taking pictures of my own childhood years ago. I made a mental note to ask Mark about it at dinner, but when I got home, he seemed evasive. He said something about the documentary being a great opportunity for Oakdale kids to share their stories, and that James was a good guy. But when I asked him if he knew James personally, he quickly changed the subject. That evening, I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences. I made a note of every unusual phone call, every time my mom mentioned James Reed's name in conversations, and every time I saw James's documentary equipment parked outside the library. The next morning, I decided to investigate further. I borrowed Mark's old laptop and searched online for any information about James Reed's documentary. What I found was disturbing: a blog post from 5 years ago detailing how James had been following his own childhood subjects into adulthood, using their stories for his research. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read through the comments, where several people accused James of exploiting his subjects. I decided to dig deeper and started searching public records for any information about James Reed's past. I scrolled through Mark's old laptop files, searching for more information about James Reed's documentary. That's when I saw a folder labeled Oakdale Project, with a timestamp from the day before my phone started acting up. The date and time were the same as the unknown caller on my phone records, and the location was listed as Mark's house. I scrolled through Mark's old laptop files, searching for more information about James Reed's documentary. That's when I saw a folder labeled Oakdale Project, with a timestamp from the day before my phone started acting up. The date and time were the same as the unknown caller on my phone records, and the location was listed as Mark's house. My heart sank as I realized that James had been using Mark's house as a central hub for his documentary, and that Mark had known about it all along. I remembered how Mark would often, accidentally, leave his flip phone in the kitchen or living room, and how he'd always been so evasive when I asked him about James. The ad in the Oakdale Gazette suddenly made sense. It was a clever ruse to lure people into participating in the documentary without knowing what they were getting themselves into. I felt a wave of betrayal wash over me as I realized that Mark had been using me, and possibly others, as unwitting subjects for James's research. The strange phone calls, the weird ad in the paper, it was all just part of their operation. I recalled the many times I'd seen James's camera equipment parked outside the library, and how my mom would often mention his name in conversation. It all made sense now. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of relief that I finally knew what was going on. I shut down Mark's laptop and confronted him about the documentary. He broke down, admitting he had been complicit in James's project and that he had been trying to make amends by helping me uncover the truth. I called the police, who arrived at our house within the hour. They took James into custody for stalking and exploiting his subjects, and Mark was charged with obstruction of justice. I moved out of the house, but not before packing up the old flip phone and a stack of Oakdale Gazette issues with the documentary ad circled. It was a small victory, but it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. As I looked back at the house, I noticed the faded sticker on Mark's old Honda Civic read, "World's okayest golfer." It seemed like a cruel joke now. I've been married to Mike for 5 years, and we thought our little family was complete with our 2-year-old son Jack. We live in a cozy 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Portland, where everyone knows each other's names and kids play together in the park on weekends. Our neighborhood is surrounded by tall trees, and we have a big backyard perfect for barbecues and birthday parties. I drive a 2017 Honda CR-V, which Mike bought for me as a surprise gift when I passed my driving test. We take Jack to the nearby Trader Joe's every Saturday morning, where he loves picking out his favorite snacks, like puffed rice and animal crackers. Last week, Mike came home late from work, which wasn't unusual, but what was strange was that he seemed different. He was quieter than usual, and when I asked him what was wrong, he just shook his head and went to bed. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as the days went by, Mike's behavior became more and more erratic. He would leave the house for hours without telling me where he was going, and when he came back, he would just shrug it off like nothing was wrong. One morning, I decided to follow him, and what I saw shook me to my core. I was rummaging through Mike's old backpack, which he had left on the floor next to our son's toy box, when I stumbled upon a receipt from the Olive Garden in Beaverton. It was dated last Wednesday, which was the same day he said he worked late at the office. But what caught my attention was the notation, "Meet J 9 p.m., scribbled on the edge of the receipt in Mike's handwriting. My mind started racing as I thought about all the late nights he'd been working lately, and how he always seemed evasive when I asked him about it. I pushed aside the nagging feeling, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But my eyes kept drifting back to the receipt. I remembered that last week we had gone to the Olive Garden for our son's birthday dinner, and Mike had left early, saying he had a work meeting. But why would he have a meeting at the same restaurant where we just had dinner? And who was Jay? I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that Mike might be hiding something from me. I've been going over Mike's schedule, trying to pinpoint when he started changing his behavior. I checked our calendar from the past year, and I noticed that every Friday for the past 3 months, he'd leave for work an hour earlier than usual. He'd say it was for a meeting, but when I asked him what the meeting was about, he'd just shrug it off. I started keeping a list of all the times he'd left early on Fridays. I had not changed it. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patel, mentioned that she saw Mike arguing with someone in a black SUV outside our house last week. I checked our security footage, but it only captured a blurry image of the license plate. It was a 20-year-old Honda Civic, not a black SUV. I started making a few discreet phone calls to friends who work at the DMV, asking if they could check the registration for any car matching that description. The next day, Mike came home late from work again, and when I asked him about the argument, he just laughed it off, saying he was stressed about an upcoming project. But what caught my attention was that he'd been wearing a new watch that night, a Rolex, which looked expensive for his taste. I remembered seeing a similar watch on a guy who worked at the Olive Garden where I found the receipt. I decided to pay another visit to the Olive Garden, this time during their lunch hour, and see if I could catch a glimpse of anyone matching Mike's description. As I was leaving, I overheard 2 waitresses gossiping about a married couple who had been seen together at the restaurant several times. The husband's name was mentioned, but it wasn't Mike's. It was John, and I remembered that Mike's best friend's name is also John. I started feeling a knot in my stomach as I pieced together more and more inconsistencies in Mike's story. He'd been acting strangely for weeks, but now I had a nagging feeling that something was seriously off. I decided to pay another visit to the DMV, this time asking if they could check any vehicle registrations matching the description of a Honda Civic with a similar license plate number. The clerk told me it would take a few days to get back to me, but I knew I had to keep digging. As I hung up the phone, I noticed that Mike was standing in the kitchen, staring at me with an expression that looked almost guilty. I was scrolling through the security footage when I saw my mother walk into our house, wearing a black dress and sunglasses, like she just stepped out of a movie trailer. She gave Mike a hug, and they exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. As I stood there, staring at the security footage, my mind racing with questions, my mother's face on the screen seemed to warp and distort in my memory. I remembered how she'd been acting strange lately, showing up unannounced and staying for days, claiming she needed to get away from her life in California. I recalled the way she'd always been more like a friend than a parent, always pushing boundaries and challenging authorities. And now, seeing her walk into our house, give Mike a hug, and exchange that look with him, it all made sense. The late nights, the erratic behavior, the new watch, it was all about keeping up appearances, hiding their secret affair. I thought back to all the times my mother had been at home when I was younger, how she'd always seemed distant, like she was watching me from afar. And now, I realized she'd been watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to insert herself back into our lives. The Rolex watch wasn't just any watch, it was a symbol of their affair, a trophy they'd won together. Mike's behavior, his guiltiness when I confronted him about the receipt, it all made sense now. My mother had been manipulating him, using her charm and persuasion to keep their secret safe. And I had unknowingly played along, oblivious to the truth. The revelation was both shocking and sad, like a punch to the gut that left me breathless. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me, but as I looked at the security footage, I saw something else, a family torn apart by secrets and lies, a family that had been hiding in plain sight all along. I sat in stunned silence as my mother walked into our house, her eyes locking with Mike's. The guilt was written all over their faces. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure. My mind racing. I remembered the times my mother had been acting strange, showing up unannounced and staying for days. It all made sense now. Mike's behavior, his guiltiness when I confronted him about the receipt. It was all about keeping up appearances, hiding their secret affair. I thought back to the security footage, how they exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. I decided to take action to protect myself and our family. I packed my bags, and with Jack by my side, we left the house, leaving Mike and my mother to face the consequences of their actions. The next day, I filed for divorce, citing adultery as grounds. A few weeks later, the police arrived at our doorstep, arresting Mike for bigamy and conspiracy. He was taken away in handcuffs, his head hung low in shame. My mother, on the other hand, disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a faint scent of perfume. I felt a sense of peace wash over me as I realized that justice had been served. Our family was finally free from the toxic web of lies and deceit. 2 weeks later, I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. The post got a lot of attention, and I've been surprised by the number of people who have reached out with similar stories of infidelity and betrayal. Mike's lawyer called yesterday to inform me that he's been released on bail, pending his court date in 3 months' time. I'm not sure what to expect, but I'm prepared for whatever comes next. As for my mother, she's still MIA, and I've tried not to dwell on her disappearance too much. Instead, I've been focusing on rebuilding my life and finding closure. I started therapy last week, and it's been helpful in processing all the emotions that have come up since everything came to light. I'm taking things one day at a time, trying to find peace in the midst of chaos. I've been living in our hometown of Oakdale my entire life, surrounded by the same familiar faces and family names that my father's family has known for generations. Growing up, I always thought I was an only child, but it wasn't until I was 25 and decided to take the 23andMe DNA test that I discovered the shocking truth: my father had fathered 7 other children with women in our hometown. My mother passed away when I was a teenager, but Dad still lives in the same old house where I grew up, just a few blocks from the Walmart Supercenter where I worked part-time as a teenager. I remember driving my '85 Honda Civic to the store every Saturday morning to help my dad with his groceries. One of the women my father had children with is my stepmother, Karen, whom he married in 2005. She's always been kind to me, but I've never met the other 6 siblings. It's been 2 months since I got the results, and I'm still trying to process everything. My friends think it's weird that I'm not reaching out to my half-siblings, but what can I say? I don't even know if they want to meet me. Maybe this is a good time to start reconnecting with some of these people. Or maybe I should just stay hidden. I was browsing through my old phone bill from AT&T, which I'd kept for tax purposes, when I stumbled upon a suspicious number, 555-112. I didn't recognize the number, but what caught my attention was the time of the call. It's 9:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in March 2018, exactly 6 years ago. My parents used to get calls from our neighbors, the Watsons, around that time, but I'm certain this was not a neighborly chat. The caller's name was listed as unknown. I showed the bill to my husband, Mike, who works for Verizon, and he couldn't find any record of the call on his end either. We both agreed it was strange, but we didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a wrong number. However, 2 weeks later, while going through some old receipts from that time period, I found a faded receipt from the Olive Garden in Oakdale, dated March 17, 2018. The order was for a special occasion and had our table number printed on it 37. That's when I started to feel a creeping sense of unease, like someone was watching us, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I started going through my old emails from the past few years, searching for any clues that might explain why my father had fathered 7 other children with women in our hometown. One email stood out, a message from Karen's cousin, Tom, who I'd met once at a family gathering. He'd sent me a simple hello on my birthday last year, but what caught my attention was the timestamp 24:07 a.m. on October 12th. I had no memory of waking up that night or sending him a response. The next day, I visited the local post office and asked to see their security footage for that date. They showed me a grainy tape of a woman with long brown hair and a red coat walking into the post office at exactly 12:45 a.m. She looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. I made a note to ask Karen if she knew anyone matching that description. The next day, I received a call from an unknown number, 5T5A765. The caller hung up after one ring. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. The message was a single word, Karen. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized this might be connected to the mysterious email and post office visit. I began to dig through old high school yearbooks from our hometowns, looking for any mention of my father's other children or their mothers. One name kept popping up, Emily Wilson, who'd been a classmate of mine. I remembered her being friends with Karen, but I never knew she was my half-sister. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences and coincidences, trying to make sense of it all. A package from Amazon arrived at my doorstep with no shipping label, just a handwritten note that said, "For you?" Inside, I found a small silver locket with a picture of my father's face on it. It was the same locket he wore in old photos. I spent the next few days researching online and talking to friends and family members, trying to gather more information. One name kept coming up, Rachel Jenkins, a woman who'd worked at local library where I used to study. I stared at the old yearbook photo of Emily Wilson, my supposed classmate, and noticed something jarring. Her smile was identical to the one on the silver locket I found weeks ago. The same locket my father wore in old photos, which he never showed me. Now I was beginning to wonder, had he ever shown it to anyone else? I stared at the old yearbook photo of Emily Wilson, my supposed classmate, and noticed something jarring. Her smile was identical to the one on the silver locket I found weeks ago. The same locket my father wore in old photos, which he never showed me. But now I knew why. Karen, my stepmother, had been keeping secrets of her own. When I confronted her about the mysterious phone calls and strange occurrences, she broke down in tears and revealed the shocking truth. She was not only my father's wife, but also one of his other children, a product of a long-term affair that started when we were both teenagers. The same woman who'd been sending me cryptic messages and packages was, in fact, trying to reach out to her own children, including me. The receipt from the Olive Garden, the 20:47 a.m. email, the silver locket, all of it made sense now. Karen's cousin Tom had been trying to help her get in touch with us, and the mysterious caller who hung up after one ring was him, trying to get our attention. I felt a mix of emotions as the truth sank in. Sadness for my father's infidelity, anger at his deception, but also a sense of understanding for Karen's actions. She had been keeping us all connected, even when we didn't know it. The small, silver locket now made sense. It was a symbol of our family's complicated past, and the connections that ran deeper than I ever could have imagined. I sat down with Karen and her lawyer to discuss the details of our family's complicated past. We decided to press charges against my father for multiple counts of bigamy, as well as emotional abuse and neglect. The court ordered him to pay a significant fine and attend counseling sessions to address his behavior. I also filed for a restraining order to ensure my safety and that of my half-siblings. It was a difficult but necessary step towards healing and rebuilding our relationships. As I looked at the yearbook photo of Emily, now a friend and confidant, I felt a sense of closure and understanding. We had all been victims of my father's actions, but we were also survivors. I realized that the silver locket was more than just a symbol of our complicated past. It was a reminder of the strength and resilience of our family. 2 weeks later, I'm still trying to process the overwhelming response my post received. I've been bombarded with messages from strangers and friends alike, all offering support and sharing their own stories of family secrets and trauma. One development that's worth mentioning is that the restraining order hearing was scheduled for next month, and I'm feeling a mix of emotions about testifying against my father in court. On a more personal note, I started seeing a therapist to work through the emotional fallout of our family's past, which has been a game changer for my mental health. As I sit here with Emily, now a close friend, I'm reminded that healing is a long-term process. It's not something you can rush or put behind you like a bad memory.
I've been married to my wife Rachel for 3 years now. We live in a cozy two-story house on Elm Street, where the Petersons, our next-door neighbors, have been renting out their basement apartment since 1923. I've gotten used to the sound of their lawn mower on Sunday mornings, and the smell of Bill's famous BBQ sauce wafting from their patio grill. My wife and I often borrow their trash cans for our weekly compost pickup. And we've even hosted a few dinner parties for our friends in their backyard. It was a relief when Rachel landed that sales job at the local Target store. She's always been great with people. And it's nice to have some extra money in the bank. But what really gets me is how they've always been so forthcoming about their family's history. Bill told us all about his grandfather, who allegedly ran a small-time speakeasy in the neighborhood back in the Prohibition era. Rachel's always fascinated by that kind of stuff, and I have to admit, it's pretty cool to think about all the secrets hidden beneath our quiet suburban streets. Still, there's something that's been nagging at me lately. I'm not sure what it is. But I just feel like we're getting in over our heads with these neighbors. I've been getting these strange flyers in the mail, addressed to our house on Elm Street. At first, I thought it was just a mistake, but then I saw the same thing happen to Mrs. Jenkins next door. She got 2 of them in 1 week. The flyers are for some used car dealership called Slick's Auto Auction on Route 9, and they're offering 10% off all sales this weekend only. What caught my eye was the part about no financing required. But when I looked closer, there was a tiny fine print that said, "Apply now and get approved." I wondered why someone would be sending us mail with no connection to our family's history or credit history. Rachel mentioned that her coworker at Target had told her about a similar promotion. But when I asked to see the flyer, she just shrugged and said it was probably some scam. I'm not sure what to make of it, but now I find myself checking the mailbox 3 times a day instead of once. And I've started to notice the way the light reflects off the envelopes, making them seem almost uniform. I'd been putting off calling my wife Rachel at work for too long. She was on her lunch break, and I needed to ask her about the flyers we'd been getting in the mail. I walked out to the kitchen and picked up the phone, noticing that the same Target store logo was printed on the back of the couch cushion where Rachel liked to sit. I flipped through the channels while waiting for her to pick up. The news was talking about a string of robberies in the area, but the footage looked grainy and unconvincing. When Rachel finally answered, she sounded distracted and said something about having to go over the weekend sales numbers with the manager. I asked her about the flyers, but she just said it was probably some kind of scam, and told me not to worry about it. I hung up the phone and walked back into the living room, where our neighbor Bill was standing by the bookshelf. He was holding a small stack of old photographs, and seemed engrossed in conversation with himself. I didn't remember him ever being interested in our family photos before, so I asked him what was going on. He looked up at me with an embarrassed expression and said he was just admiring the frames. I nodded and went back to my computer, where I was trying to research the used car dealership mentioned on the flyers. The website seemed professional enough, but something about the language sounded off. I made a note to call the Better Business Bureau later that day. When I went to grab a snack from the pantry, I noticed that the carton of milk was empty again. Rachel always buys it in 2s and labels them with her name. This time, the second one had been opened, but only partially consumed. I put the container back in its original place, and wondered if maybe we should start labeling our leftovers more carefully. Later that night, I got a call from the local library's circulation desk, informing me that someone had returned a book with my name on it. But the due date was for next week. I realized that I must have accidentally borrowed it myself. But when I checked my pockets, there was no receipt or label inside. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then I remembered a conversation I'd overheard between Bill and his daughter Linda, who came over to visit last weekend. They were talking about some kind of family reunion that I hadn't been invited to. And when I asked Rachel about it later, she seemed evasive and said something about hold family business. It was starting to sound like we were caught in the middle of something much bigger than just a few errant flyers. I opened the garage door, and a faint scent of motor oil wafted out. In the corner, my wife's old sedan, a 20-year-old Honda Civic, had its trunk slightly ajar. I was certain I'd locked it myself. A Target shopping bag from yesterday's sales trip hung limply from the door handle, its contents spilling onto the floor. A set of fine china, a vintage vase, and a brand new laptop. I walked back into the garage, my heart still racing from the sudden realization. The trunk of Rachel's old sedan was open, and I could see that it had been recently used. The dust on the interior was still disturbed, and there were faint scratches on the paint job. I looked closer and saw that the laptop in the Target bag was not just any laptop, it was a high-end model, and the brand was one I'd never seen before. I wondered who could have bought it for Rachel, and why they would go to such lengths to keep it hidden. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it all, I noticed a small piece of paper stuck between the seats. It was a receipt from Slick's auto auction, and it had a date stamp that matched the one on the flyers I'd been getting in the mail. But what really caught my attention was the note scrawled at the bottom. It said, P's car. In hasty handwriting. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that P must stand for Patricia, Bill's daughter who had supposedly died all those years ago. The Petersons had been using Rachel's car to transport. What? And the Target bag with the fine china and vintage vase. It was all part of some elaborate ruse. I called the police, and they arrived within the hour. The officers arrested Bill and his wife, Edna, for running a scheme that had been operating in our neighborhood for decades. They were charged with grand theft, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit mail fraud. The police found evidence of multiple fake identities, stolen credit cards, and fake bank accounts linked to Rachel's old sedan. The authorities recovered the Target bag's contents, which included a valuable antique vase and a brand new laptop. All purchased using stolen credit card information. I was relieved that the truth had finally come out, and my wife and I could start rebuilding our lives. We moved out of the house on Elm Street, and I started working with the authorities to help other potential victims. It took a while for Rachel to recover from the trauma, but with therapy and support, she slowly found her way again. As I looked back on the experience, I realized that it was a lesson in the power of manipulation, and the importance of staying vigilant. It's been 3 weeks since the arrest, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. Our post received thousands of comments, and I was surprised by how many people shared their own stories of being targeted by Bill and Edna. The police informed me that they've identified over a dozen more victims, and I'm working closely with them to help bring those individuals justice as well. Today, in fact, I received a call from a private investigator who's been hired by the DA's office to look into the family's assets. It's amazing how much was hidden behind that facade of respectability on Elm Street. Now, as I sit here with Rachel, watching her finally start to heal and rebuild our lives, I'm reminded that the real lesson here isn't about being vigilant, but about the resilience of the human spirit.
I'm a 35-year-old wife and mother of 2 living in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. My family and I moved into our 5-bedroom colonial house on Oakwood Drive 4 years ago. It was a big purchase for us, but we needed more space since my husband's job started requiring him to work from home. Our neighborhood Maple Ridge has a strong sense of community. Everyone knows everyone, and we often host block parties and game nights. I've even asked for renovation advice on the local Facebook group, Maple Ridge Homeowners, which is moderated by our neighbor, Ryan Thompson. He's always been helpful and friendly, but lately, I've noticed him being a bit too chatty online. I often joked with my husband that Ryan was like the mayor of our neighborhood, always keeping everyone informed about local events and issues. But I have to admit, I've grown accustomed to seeing his smiling face pop up on my phone every time I check the group. My husband works from home in our basement office, and I often bring him coffee or lunch. Today was no different. I stopped by the Starbucks on High Street to pick up a cappuccino for him, and when I got back home, I caught him in a heated argument with someone on his computer. The screen was locked, but I could see the words, Facebook and Maple Ridge on it. My husband's face was red, and he looked like he'd just seen a ghost. I should have kept walking. As I walked into the house, I noticed the coffee cup on my husband's desk was from the coffee club downtown, a place we never go to. I remember buying him a cappuccino from Starbucks on High Street this morning, and he usually gets his coffee from the office kitchen anyway. But what really caught my attention was the laptop screen locked with a password. But I could see the words, Facebook, and Maple Ridge Homeowners on it. My husband's face was red, and he looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He muttered something about needing to talk to me about something, but I had no idea what was going on. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just shook his head and continued staring at the screen. I should have pushed him to tell me what was wrong right then, but I didn't. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off after catching my husband in a heated argument with someone on his computer. I started paying closer attention to his behavior, and it seemed like he was avoiding eye contact with me more often than usual. I'd ask him about his day, and he'd just grunt or change the subject. He also started taking longer lunches, claiming he needed to run errands or work on a project, but I knew he usually worked from home. I noticed that our neighborhood Facebook group, Maple Ridge Homeowners, had been active lately with many posts about local events and issues. Ryan Thompson, our friendly moderator, had been posting frequently, and his comments seemed overly enthusiastic. I started to wonder if there was something more going on behind the scenes. I decided to start keeping a list of the posts he made, just in case. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, I saw a notification from Ryan's Facebook account. He'd posted a photo of himself and his wife at a local restaurant, with a caption that seemed overly affectionate. I hadn't seen them out together before, and it raised some red flags. I started to wonder if my husband had been in contact with him outside of the group. The next day, I saw my husband's car parked in front of the coffee club downtown, a place we never go to. He claimed he was working on a project and needed to meet someone, but when I asked who, he just shook his head. I decided to do some digging and checked our local news websites for any mentions of Ryan or the coffee club. That's when I stumbled upon an article about the coffee shop being a hub for local business owners and entrepreneurs. Ryan's name was mentioned as one of the organizers, and it seemed like he was involved in some capacity. My husband had been going there regularly, according to my notes. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. What was my husband doing at this coffee shop, and why was Ryan involved? I decided to do some more research, starting with a public records search on our local government website. I stared at the screen, my heart racing, as I scrolled through Ryan's Facebook posts. He'd been posting photos of our neighborhood's events, but one photo caught my eye, a picture of him standing next to a woman, with a caption that read, "My wonderful wife and I at the Maple Ridge homeowners potluck dinner." I stared at the screen, my heart racing, as I scrolled through Ryan's Facebook posts. That's when I saw it, a photo of him and my husband together, with a caption that read, "My wonderful wife and I at the Maple Ridge homeowners potluck dinner." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My husband had told me he was just working from home, but now I realized he'd been meeting Ryan at the coffee club, a place we never go to. I remembered the cappuccino cup on his desk from the coffee club, and the way he'd been avoiding eye contact with me lately. It all made sense now, my husband's secret meetings. His sudden interest in Ryan's posts. He wasn't just working from home, he was cheating on me. With the moderator of our neighborhood Facebook group. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I scrolled through more posts. There were photos of them together, laughing and smiling, and captions that talked about their close friendship. It was all just a facade. My husband had been leading a double life, and I had no idea. The photo on Ryan's page showed them standing next to each other, with Ryan's arm slung over my husband's shoulder. It was a familiar pose, one I'd seen in photos of my husband with his friends at the office. But this time, it wasn't just a friendly gesture. This time it was something more. I filed for divorce, citing adultery as the grounds for separation. My husband's affair with Ryan, the moderator of our neighborhood Facebook group, had shattered my trust and sense of security. I remembered how I'd joked about Ryan being like the mayor of our neighborhood, always keeping everyone informed about local events and issues. Now, I saw him for what he was, a manipulative and deceitful man who had exploited his position to cheat on me. As I navigated the process of divorce, I realized that my husband's infidelity had also damaged his relationships with our children. They were struggling to understand why their father had lied to them and hurt me. I took comfort in knowing that we would get through this together as a family. Ryan's actions had consequences beyond just our personal lives. He was forced to resign from moderating the Facebook group, and his reputation in the community suffered. The coffee shop where he and my husband had met regularly lost some customers due to the scandal. 2 weeks have passed since my post went viral, and I'm still trying to process the aftermath. The original post received over 10,000 comments, many of which expressed shock and outrage on behalf of our community. My husband's affair with Ryan has been all over the local news, and I've had to deal with some uncomfortable confrontations at work. I just received a call from my lawyer, informing me that we have a court date set for next month to finalize the divorce. As for Ryan, he's lost his job as a barista at the coffee shop where he met my husband, and he's also been banned from our neighborhood Facebook groups. Looking back on everything that's happened, I'm still trying to come to terms with how far my husband was willing to go to keep his secret. It's been a difficult time, but I'm grateful for the support of my loved ones and the strength to move forward. I'm Emma, a 32-year-old freelance writer living in Chicago. My partner, Alex, is a data analyst for a consulting firm downtown, and we like to joke that our lives are predictable because he has spreadsheets for everything, including our social calendar. We've been together for 5 years, and he's the one who convinced me to move out of my cramped studio apartment in Wicker Park and into a 3-bedroom house in Logan Square with his best friend, Jamie, who is also our landlord. Jamie works as an electrician and has an affinity for restored classic cars. Our garage is currently home to a 1969 Mustang Fastback that he's been restoring for years. We pay rent through a company called Rent Ready, which allows us to split the payments into 2 installments per month. I've been using this service since we moved in last June, and it's been a lifesaver with my irregular income. Alex and I like to spend our free time exploring new breweries and trying out independent coffee shops. We're both fans of the Chicago Tribune, and I've been reading an article a week on their website about corruption in local government. The latest one mentioned a possible connection between a former city alderman and the Russian mafia. But it was just speculation. I filed it away as something to follow up on later. I've been feeling a bit off kilter all morning, and I'm not sure why. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed that Alex's usual spot at the counter was empty. He usually leaves his laptop and phone there when he's working from home. But today it was just a single coffee cup with a Starbucks logo and a note that said, "I'll be back by 2 p.m. I shrugged it off and made myself a cup of coffee, but as I was pouring the creamer, I saw that the container was almost empty. Alex always refills it every Sunday morning at the store down the street, Whole Foods. But today's date on the calendar was Tuesday. I didn't think much of it, but as I was about to head back to my office, I saw a package on the kitchen table with my name on it. It was a box from Amazon delivered just that morning. I opened it to find a book I had never ordered, The Art of Soviet Music, with no note or explanation. The cover price was reasonable, but the thing that made me pause was the strange notation on the inside flap, compliments of Rent Ready. I stared at the book on my kitchen table, The Art of Soviet Music, trying to understand why Rent Ready would send me something I never ordered. I checked our account online, but there was no record of the purchase. I shrugged it off as a mistake and started making a list in my notebook, every strange occurrence since we moved in. The empty creamer container, Alex's sudden absence, the mysterious package. I also jotted down the phone number for Rent Ready's customer service and made a mental note to call them later. As I was writing, I noticed that the 1969 Mustang Fastback in our garage had its doors slightly ajar, which was unusual since Jamie always made sure to close them when he went out. I remembered him mentioning that he needed to replace the lock, but I hadn't seen any progress on that. I decided to take a closer look and examine the garage's security system, which Alex had installed last year. The keypad was still there, but the screen was dark and unresponsive. I checked the power cord, thinking maybe it just needed a reboot, but everything seemed fine. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease as I realized that multiple systems in our house were malfunctioning or not functioning at all. The smart thermostat had been acting up for weeks, and the Wi-Fi router was occasionally dropping signal. It all seemed unrelated, but my writer's instinct was screaming at me to connect the dots. I called Alex's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back as soon as possible. While waiting, I decided to dig deeper into the Rent Ready company and see if there were any red flags. A quick search online turned up nothing suspicious, but I did find a review on Yelp from someone who claimed they had been overcharged by the company. The reviewer mentioned that Rent Ready had sent them random stuff, without explanation, which seemed eerily familiar. I added this to my list and continued to research. As I was scrolling through the article about corruption in local government, I noticed a name mentioned, a former city alderman who had been linked to the Russian mafia. I made a mental note to look into his connection to Rent Ready. Just as I was about to call it a day, Alex walked in the door, holding a large coffee cup from Starbucks and wearing a strange expression. The book on my kitchen table, The Art of Soviet Music, was now open to a page with a strange notation in the margin, "Comrade Emma, your song is almost ready." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I wondered who could have written that, and why they would know me by name. As I stared at the book on my kitchen table, The Art of Soviet Music, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The notation in the margin, "Comrade Emma, your song is almost ready," seemed ominous, but I pushed it aside as a prank or a mistake. But then I remembered the empty creamer container, Alex's sudden absence, and the mysterious package from Rent Ready. It all came back to me as I opened my laptop and scrolled through our account history with Rent Ready. That's when I saw it, a transfer of funds from our account to Rent Ready's, dated last week. The amount was substantial, but what caught my attention was the note attached to the transaction. Payment for services rendered. Services rendered. What did that even mean? I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Rent Ready wasn't just a normal property management company. They were something more. Something sinister. The phone on my desk rang, breaking the silence. I hesitated for a moment before answering it. It was Alex, and he sounded different. "Emma, I'm so glad you called me back," he said, his voice trembling. "I've been trying to reach you all morning." I asked him where he had been, but he just laughed nervously. "Oh, I just went for a walk around the blocks. I needed some fresh air." But what really caught my attention was what he said next. "Emma, can we talk about your grandfather?" My grandfather. What did he have to do with anything? And then it hit me. The book on my table, the notation in the margin, it all made sense now. I called Alex, still trying to process everything I had uncovered. He arrived home soon after, and we sat down in the living room to talk. The air was thick with tension as I confronted him about Rent Ready, the book on the kitchen table, and his strange behavior. He confessed that he had been working for Rent Ready as an undercover agent, tasked with uncovering potential espionage activities in the city. He had been feeding them information about our lives, including my grandfather's past, in exchange for their protection. The notation in the book was a message from his handler, a clear warning that I was getting too close to the truth. Alex's eyes were filled with tears as he apologized for putting me and our lives at risk. We decided to go to the authorities together, and with the evidence we had gathered, Rent Ready's true nature was exposed. The company's leaders were arrested and charged with conspiracy and identity theft. My grandfather's past was finally laid to rest, and I felt a sense of closure wash over me. As we sat on our couch, holding each other tightly, I realized that sometimes the truth is too much to bear alone. But with the right people by your side, you can face anything. Update 3 weeks later. I'm still trying to process the aftermath of Alex's confession and our decision to expose RentReady's true nature. Our post got a lot of attention, with many of you reaching out to share similar experiences or offer support. As we prepare for the company's leader's sentencing in 2 months' time, I've been receiving follow-up letters from concerned citizens who had unknowingly provided information to RentReady. One letter in particular caught my eye, a woman who had sent her resume to RentReady under false pretenses, only to discover that they had used her personal info for identity theft. Her words struck a chord with me, and I've been reflecting on the long-term effects of Alex's actions. I've started therapy to work through my feelings, and it's been a slow but necessary process. I'm Alex Chen, a freelance writer and social media influencer with over 200,000 followers on Instagram. My life was turned upside down last year when I started getting hate comments and DMs from a user named Savage Squad. They would post vile messages about my weight, my appearance, and even threaten to show up at one of my book signings in person. I tried to brush it off, but the constant barrage of negativity took a toll on my mental health. I started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and depression that followed. One day, while responding to a particularly vicious comment, I noticed that Savage Squad had mentioned their employer, a major tech company called Zenith Inc., in one of their posts. I did some digging and discovered that Zenith was having a massive layoff that month, but I couldn't find any record of someone named Savage Squad being an employee. That's when I started to suspect that this troll might not be who they claimed to be. I began to investigate further, looking into Zenith's HR records and even going undercover on their internal chat forums. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a shocking discovery. As I scrolled through the internal chat forums of Zenith Inc., I noticed something peculiar. One thread, titled Team Building Exercise, had a list of participants that caught my attention. Amidst the familiar names of my coworkers, one person stood out. A user named Savage Squad was listed as having attended a meeting at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday last month. But what really made my heart skip a beat was that the meeting was held at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind in downtown Los Angeles, just a block away from my apartment. I had never seen Savage Squad mention their location before, and something about the coincidence made me feel uneasy. I quickly pulled up the security footage from The Daily Grind for last month's Tuesday at 2 p.m., but it was grainy and didn't show much. Still, I knew I had to dig deeper. As I delved deeper into the world of Savage Squad's online persona, I started to notice patterns that seemed too convenient to be coincidences. I began keeping a list of every mention of Zenith Inc. in their posts, along with timestamps and specific phrases that stood out. The more I read, the more I realized that this troll wasn't just targeting me, they were actively recruiting followers on social media platforms, using hashtags like PayHatersWillD and FaceSavageSquad roles. I started tracking these recruits, noticing a disturbing trend. They were all from low-income backgrounds, with limited access to education and job opportunities. One night, while scrolling through Savage Squad's Instagram stories, I saw a post that made my heart skip a beat. They had tagged their colleague, at Zenith Inc., a user named Emily Chen, who claimed to work in HR. I remembered Emily from our company-wide team building event last year, or at least, I thought I did. I couldn't find any record of her being an employee at Zenith. My suspicion grew as I noticed a peculiar post from Savage Squad's account, a screenshot of an email from Zenith's IT department, allegedly from Emily Chen. The subject line read, RGNT access request for Zenith's internal network. I pulled up the company's internal network logs and found something shocking. On the same day as the screenshot, someone had accessed the system using Emily's credentials, but from a different IP address. I started digging into Zenith's employee records, searching for any information on someone matching Emily Chen's username. That's when I stumbled upon a strange discrepancy. Emily Chen didn't exist in our company's HR database, but Savage Squad had mentioned her in multiple posts. I decided to investigate further and placed a phone call to Zenith's HR department, asking for Emily Chen by name. The person on the other end hesitated before responding. I'm afraid we don't have anyone by that name working here. I asked them to check their internal records again, but the response was the same: no Emily Chen in sight. As I hung up the phone, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was closing in on the truth. But what did it all mean? Was Savage Squad just a clever imposter? Or was there something more sinister at play? I logged back into the company's internal network, and that's when I saw a folder labeled I as only, with my name on it. But what sent chills down my spine was the timestamp. The folder had been created yesterday, at 3 p.m., by someone using Emily Chen's login credentials. As I gazed at the folder labeled Eyes Only, with my name on it, my mind racing with questions, I realized that Emily Chen was not just a fictional persona created by Savage Squad, but a real employee at Zenith Inc., whose login credentials had been compromised. The timestamp on the folder's creation hinted at a shocking connection. 3 p.m. yesterday was the exact time when Savage Squad had messaged me on Instagram, taunting me about my discovery of their true identity. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Emily Chen must have been in cahoots with Savage Squad all along. I remembered the peculiar conversation I had with Zenith's HR department earlier, where they claim not to have anyone by the name of Emily Chen working there. It was all a ruse to keep her identity hidden. The folder's contents revealed that Emily had been secretly collaborating with Savage Squad to gather sensitive information about Zenith's internal network and sell it on the dark web. My list of suspicious posts and phrases from Savage Squad now made sense. They were using their online presence to recruit followers and create a false narrative, all while using Emily's credentials to access the company's system. The image of Emily Chen's face flashed in my mind, her bright smile and kind demeanor that I had naively believed were genuine. I recalled the way she would, accidentally, leave her laptop open when we worked together on team building projects. After weeks of digging, I finally uncovered the truth. Zenith Inc.'s internal network had been compromised by a former employee, Emily Chen, who had sold access to sensitive information on the dark web. Savage Squad was her accomplice, using their online presence to recruit followers and create a false narrative, while Emily used her credentials to gather intel. I reported them to Zenith's HR department, and the company cooperated fully with the authorities. Emily and Savage Squad were charged with corporate espionage and identity theft, but more importantly, they lost their jobs and reputation. As for me, I took a step back from social media and focused on my writing career. I realized that the hate I received was a small price to pay for speaking truth to power. The experience taught me that even in the darkest corners of the internet, there's always a way to expose the truth and bring justice to those who have been wronged. It's been 2 weeks since I shared my story, and I'm blown away by the response. Over 10,000 comments and counting. I've been fielding messages from people who've gone through similar experiences. And it's heartening to see that we're not alone. I received a call from my mom last night, reminding me that she's always proud of me no matter what. She also mentioned that my grandma, who's been a bit isolated lately, has been reading the story and found solace in it. As for Savage Squad and Emily Chen, they've reportedly been denied bail pending their corporate espionage trial next month. For me, this experience has been a reminder to stay vigilant online and to focus on my creative pursuits. I've started working on a new novel, and it's been cathartic to channel the energy from this ordeal into something positive.